This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz, and I'm very excited to be speaking with Austin Stark and Joseph Schuman about Coup. How are you both doing today?
No, we're good.
Excellent.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. My first question is, do you consider yourselves scholars of history?
Absolutely not. No.
I would say that would be a strong way to describe us. Um, but certainly, I love history. I'm watching a Civil War miniseries right now. So the Ken Burns miniseries, which is pretty fascinating.
So, can you tell me about the inspiration of this film and how it came to be set in this very important and interesting historical period?
Sure. During the spring of 2020, Austin and I found ourselves isolated together with so much time on our hands. And we go back in history. We've known each other since we were 6 or 7. And with that time and with the inspiration of the early days of COVID all around us, we had material to, and inspiration. And one of the things that struck us in the spring of 2020 was we were witnessing a tale of two cities. The wealthy fled to their Hamptons castles. We're both from New York, and the poor were sort of just left to fester. And we wanted to tell a story that wasn't so on the nose as doing it set in the present. So setting it during the Spanish flu was a way to explore those uncanny parallels.
Yeah, I would say that originally for the first month or so while we were concepting this, it was set in the present day. And one of us read, I can't remember who, one of us read an article about the similarities between the Spanish flu and COVID. And then we started imagining all of the beats that had laid out at that time, taking place during the Spanish flu, and everything started working in a completely different way, in a much more interesting way, I'd say. And so then we spent about a month after that researching the time period of the Spanish flu and rejiggering certain things that we had already plotted out in order to make it work for that. And I would say overall, I think that was the big revelation for this film. Because the other thing I'll say is, like, there is something about setting the film at that time that's really hard to put your finger on, that allows our themes to resonate on a much more meaningful level for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think I remember, early on in the pandemic hearing, there hasn't been anything like this before, except 100 years ago, there was something that was so devastating, but our communication systems and technology just weren't the same way that, John Wilkes Booth was able to evade capture for a while because people didn't know what he looked like, because you don't have the internet and all these things.
Yeah.
And so I think with, your protagonist here, who's pretending that he's really in the thick of it and isn't anywhere near that, it's an especially interesting way of doing it, because you couldn't tell this same exact story in the present, I don't think.
No, not at all. I totally agree.
Was there anything that surprised you in your research about that era that you just hadn't realized before?
I would say how close it was. I mean, you look at the photos, if you just Google like Spanish flu, and they're wearing masks, and there's these lockdowns, and there's people protesting in certain cities that weren't like shutting down businesses, and just a lot of the same social issues where the poor were getting screwed, and that was one of our main inspirations for Coup.
One of the biggest surprises for me was, despite the time that's passed, so little has changed. And, both in terms of the media at the time, there was a massive sort of totalitarian propaganda regime to get everyone on board with the war. The Gilded Age sort of class divide of just these, obscene fortunes and decadent life. Compared to everyone else, it's the birth of progressivism and this sort of intellectual class who believes they can govern with education and ideas alone. So it was, and I think there's almost a comedic, if not a darkly ironic sense in how little has changed, and yet we really want to believe we're headed in with some sort of direction, but maybe, as history is rhyming, it may just be totally unmoored from any sense of destination place.
Well, I think I read it maybe as that era's version of, soy lattes, but was vegetarianism big at that time?
It was for those who knew about it. I mean, George Bernard Shaw, which is a wonderful playwright. He was one of the inspirations for the Billy Magnuson's character Jay, and he was trying to get it going.
Well, I think Peter and Billy are both great for these roles, and I'm curious what you had seen them in and how that sort of molded into the characters that you had already created.
Interesting question. I think we had seen Billy in a number of roles, like Ingrid Goes West, where he's always playing the tormentor, and that's how and he's great. He's hilarious, and like when he's playing these characters. But we thought it'd be very interesting to turn the tables and make him, the tormented. And so he's just a super talented actor, and we felt like it felt fresh to us casting Billy as Jay. And Peter is just, we were longtime fans of Peter. We were thinking about him while we were writing the script because he has this like cerebral intensity, and he's always playing these very subtle, quiet characters, at least for the most part. And obviously Floyd Monk is a very brash and colorful character. And so we thought it would be really interesting for him to play Floyd because of that, because you're not used to seeing Peter be so loud. And it just felt like different for him, and that's why we decided to cast him. But it wasn't like we decided. We had to send him the script, and we don't know him at all, and thank God he read it and responded.
Probably because they
Yeah.
share a twisted sense of humor.
Yeah, he does share it.
I had actually seen them both on the stage in New York City. Peter in I think Uncle Vanya, and Billy in a Chekhov spoof, Masha something and Spike, and that was his debut as an actor anywhere. And I remember I saw it with my mother, and she said that guy is going to be a star. So, destiny.
I know also, Austin, I've seen your previous film, The God Community, which I think is very different, if only in tone from this, certainly. But what was it like working together, as collaborators on this one?
Oh, it was great. I mean, filmmaking can be a very lonely process, and Joseph and I go back to when we were 6 years old, and so it's one of those things where if I was making my next film without him, it would be so different. And I think if he was making his own film without me, the same would hold true. And so Coup really is a product of both of our personalities. And so it was a lot of fun, and I'm hoping to, and very different from the God Committee, as you noted. And so we're hoping to continue making films together.
And one of the great luxuries afforded to this kind of partnership is that whenever anything goes wrong, you just blame the other guy. So, I mean, that's a very nice thing to have.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I do think that COVID and, from what I understand, the Spanish flu were very unifying for the world. It is a sort of global understanding of what people go through. This film is still, I think, a very American film, but it did premiere at Venice. What was the reaction like there? And do you think there was anything, did that geography play into that at all?
They really got it. I felt like the audience really understood the film, and certainly the programmers. They were huge fans, and they yeah, I mean, they really got behind it, and we were a bit worried going in if about Italian audiences and whether they would get everything, but they did, and it was a really special place to premiere.
Yeah, and to make just a gross generalization, I mean, I think Europeans by and large have a sense of irony and the absurd, that is helpful for appreciating this, even though some of the more culturally specific aspects of the Americana that's going on here may be lost.
I feel like a lot of it feels more like the Gilded Age than like what we're seeing today in the US. And so that, which itself I think is obviously influenced from Europeans
Absolutely.
coming to create the United States.
Yeah.
Have you received any surprising reactions either at that festival or since then in the run up to release?
Like people throwing stuff at the screen and outrage and protest.
Sure, so, or just anything you didn't expect.
Well, one of the things that's gratifying as it is mystifying is it's since this is not a broad comedy, it's a little bit more subtle, and it's not structured like a setup and then a punchline and a setup and a punchline. People are laughing in different spaces, different places in the movie at what would otherwise be a suspenseful moment. They'll laugh, or when something finally registers, they'll laugh. So seeing, people are laughing at totally different places, and hopefully they're not laughing at us, but but that's it's gratifying to see that, and it's almost like they're processing things in different ways, that is surprising and interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other things is that we purposely designed the story so there's no traditional protagonist and no antagonist. And so one of the things that we found is, depending on, one's own political beliefs, they identify with either Floyd or Jay based on what, their backgrounds are and their political beliefs, which we find kind of fascinating.
Definitely. You mentioned that you want to be working together again. Do you have a sense of what kind of projects you would pursue next? Something like this, or more like the God Committee?
It definitely, well, I would say we're working on a script right now that's based on a short story by a writer named Alexander Weinstein. One of his other shorts became, what was it, After Yang with Colin Farrell. And so we optioned another one of his stories, and it's a sci-fi love story, sci-fi romance, like in the world of, I guess, like the closest comps would be something like Eternal Sunshine or Her or something like that. So it's quite different than this, but it's funny. So I guess, and it's not broad either. So I think the humor probably will land somewhere in the same world.
That sounds great. It sounds very interesting and different. And I wish you plenty of luck with that and with the release of this film. Thank you both for taking some time to
Thanks so much for having us.
Take care.